Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Lord of the Flies. This video is going to take you through the protagonist of the novel, that's right, the character Ralph. We're going to be thinking about why Golding presents him the way that he does and what he represents within the novel as a wider text. I'll give you some useful stuff about context to go with your textual references, so get your flashcards ready because you're about to get some key quotes and some useful interpretation. Let's get started. Okay, so Ralph is obviously our protagonist, so we know that he's going to have a significant purpose in this novel. So one of the things that he represents is, of course, civilization and order. He represents democratic rule, which is a great way to get into context. But it's really important that we always deal with Ralph as a flawed character. He's not meant to be seen like a Simon character who seems to have very few imperfections and is almost kind of revered as Christ-like. Ralph is average, you know, he's got good parts and he's got bad parts, and that's why he's a great kind of symbol for the capacity that mankind has to commit atrocities and to do wrong. So let's look at the first impressions. We meet him and Piggy right at the very beginning, and his status is made clear. Piggy is barely referred to as a child. He's it, and then the voice, and then eventually the fat boy. Whereas Ralph is described as the boy with fair hair. This is the opening sentence of the novel. We get a sense of his innocence at the very beginning because Ralph does go through a massive kind of change. You know, he opens with innocence standing on his head, and by the end of it, he's weeping for innocence, as in for the loss of innocence. So here we have him standing on his head in the middle of the scar. So very excited. There's a kind of obliviousness to his innocence as well. The fact that he's in the scar, which is symbolically a kind of, it's foreshadowing the sort of darkness and the pain and the suffering that will come and the impact of mankind on natural environments. And he's there stood on his head, la la la. And then we get this very, very positive description of him and his physicality. So he's 12 years and a few months. So he's lost his prominent tummy of childhood, but he's not yet awkward. He might make a boxer as far as width and heaviness of his shoulders went, but there was a mildness about his mouth and eyes that proclaim no devil. That's really important. So yeah, it's saying that physically he could be a boxer. It's definitely demonstrating that he's athletic, but it does point out he might be flawed, but he's not dark through and through. Like there's something, he looks sort of trustworthy. Physical appearances are key here. Golding might be sort of drawing upon almost sort of Darwinian theories, certainly theories of evolution, the survival of the fittest, or he could be drawing upon the concept of moral physiognomy, which is basically that people believe in a person's goodness based on the way that they look. So one of the reasons that Ralph might be made leader, aside from the is that kind of the fact that he looks nice, and therefore people are more likely to believe in his goodness. But like I said, Ralph is imperfect and flawed, and he's imperfect and flawed from the beginning. So if you look at the way that he behaves around Piggy, his response when Piggy confides in him what his name is, you can see from the exclamatives the kind of mocking tone. And then you've got this early betrayal of Piggy when he, after Piggy has begged him not to tell anyone, he then tells Jack and the rest of the group, which means that Piggy suffers the whole kind of en masse derision. And this is a kind of fairly standard imperfection, a kind of thoughtlessness of a young person. And if you wanted to draw context in, this is the kind of place where Golding's experience as a teacher is probably most relevant, because you don't want to stick that in at the moments of atrocity. It's quite an early doors bit of context, you know. So yeah, Golding's experience as a teacher, he would have seen this kind of power dynamic amongst the boys in the school that he worked in, and this kind of bullying, low-level bullying, or whatever you want to call it, unpleasant behaviour in this moment. We also have this little moment where his imperfections, you know, you see as almost like Ralph having a consciousness about it. So this is just before they go off for the walk. Ralph, looking with more understanding at Piggy, saw that he was hurt and crushed. So he has empathy, he can read people, he can understand. He's not Roger, you know. He hovered between the two courses of apology or further insult. So that, again, there's this awareness. He's like, I could continue being mean, or perhaps I should do something different. And then, better Piggy than Fatty. So there's a suggestion of, even though it's not great, you know, it could be worse, is what he's saying there. And that there's, you know, it's better to be what you've always been than allow Jack to name you. I don't think this is a moment of spectacular diplomacy, but it certainly demonstrates his kind of process. But diplomacy is important to the character of Ralph, and certainly democracy. So let's look at his early leadership, what makes him the leader. So I made reference to this quote. This is a really good one for your flashcards. Most obscurely, yet most powerfully, there was the conch alongside his attractive appearance. So this is what has drawn the boys to him. Remember that the conch was blown, and that's how they came together. So he immediately seems, you know, he's the man with the trumpet thing, the boy. He immediately seems sort of elevated, but as we know, the conch becomes a symbol of kind of democratic rule. But this is where I'm talking about diplomacy, okay? After he is made leader, Jack, who has assumed, because he can sing sharp and he was head chorister, that he should be, and he gets this sort of blush of mortification. He looks so angry. Ralph looks at him, eager to offer something. The choir belongs to you, of course. And then the suffusion drains away from Jack's face. So we see here Ralph managing to manage Jack and control that kind of anger. So you can look at that in this moment and think, this is a sign of what a good leader he is. But you could also look at this as a way that he accidentally opens up a way for Jack to get more power. Because obviously by giving him the choir, this is what then establishes them as hunters. Further kind of democratic ideologies being mirrored in the boys' behaviour is the way that they consider how they will speak. So we start off Ralph drawing upon what he knows, which is school. So we'll have hands up like at school. But then the conch comes into power. Then I'll give him the conch. I'll give the conch to the next person to speak, and he can hold it when he's speaking. So this is about giving all the boys the opportunity to have a say and have a voice. And that's obviously demonstrated straight away with the fact that they voted him into power. But he does create a sense of strength in himself. He won't be interrupted except by me. So knowing that even in a democracy, there does still need to be a person making those decisions. Ralph and the relationships that he forms are really, really important as well. Initially, there is this shy liking between Ralph and Jack. But in chapter 4, after they've missed the opportunity to signal the ship, there is definitely a split. This is like the pivotal moment, chapter 4, and Simon notes it. So Simon looked now from Ralph to Jack as he had looked from Ralph to the horizon. That's referencing the ship moving away, and what he saw seemed to make him afraid. So Simon understands the gravitas in the split and the shift between Ralph and Jack, that actually chaos is coming and rescue is further and further away, which is why Golding kind of mirrors the look to the horizon where the boat was to looking between, you know, the distance between the two boys. Same chapter, same idea. Ralph goes to Piggy and takes his glasses from him, and he says, not even in a positive way, you know, to light the fire. Not even Ralph knew how a link between him and Jack had been snapped and fastened elsewhere. So chapter 4 is the definitive moment where he and Jack sort of go separate ways, metaphorically. Jack doesn't leave until a little while later, but that he and Piggy become this sort of solid friendship. Create the solid friendship. And then just again a further useful little moment between Jack and Ralph. This is the moment where Ralph demands, by standing and not moving, that it means that Jack has to build a fire in a slightly different spot. But the most important thing is by the time the pile was built, they were on different sides of a high barrier. So this is the shifting relationship. And what it builds to is this little moment of honesty from Piggy a little bit later, where he says, he hates you too, Ralph. So this is because of the power dynamic, because of the sort of threat to Jack's sense of identity and what he wants to do. And Piggy is very astute here. He says he can't hurt you, i.e. Ralph is too strong. But if you stand out of the way, he'd hurt the next thing, and that's me. So Piggy understands the dynamic here perfectly, and that breakdown in the relationship. Talk about the notion of flaws and imperfection, and demonstrating those flaws and imperfection in Ralph's character early on allows us to understand the parts of his character that commit atrocities later. So Ralph, just like Piggy, is complicit in Simon's death. So here's a quote that demonstrates how and why. It's because of fear when they go over to the party and the thunderstorm happens. Piggy and Ralph, under the threat of the sky, found themselves eager to take place in this demented but partly secure society. So they recognise the fact that it is unstable and it is savage and it doesn't have reason or rationality. But the fact is it's partly secure. So they're looking for comfort, which is obviously ironic because then they murder their friend. And how do they murder their friend? In the most brutal act of violence, where there were no words and no movements, but the tearing of teeth and claws. Golding makes the boys, Piggy and Ralph included, the beast in this moment. There's such irony in them mistaking Simon for the beast, but then becoming the beast themselves. Again, reminding us that, as Simon said, maybe there is a beast, maybe it's in us. And you can see Ralph's culpability and his remorse in the next chapter, even though Piggy does actually manage to convince him to move into a denial state. It's at this moment where Ralph's boy is low and stricken, and he is cradling the conch, rocking himself to and fro. Simon's death is like another moment where the bonds to civilization and order have been kind of ripped away. And so the fact that he cradles the conch demonstrates he knows how significant he is, because he's seeking comfort from this symbol of authority. Now, you might think Ralph's complicity here seems madness when the only imperfection that we've seen so far is that cruelty to Piggy. But look at the way that Ralph takes part in the dance when Robert takes the form of the pig. There is that moment where Ralph's bloodlust has been incited, in that moment where they are trying to kill the pig, but Ralph doesn't quite manage it, and they play the game with Robert. Look at what Golding says. Ralph too was fighting to get near, to get a handful of that brown, vulnerable flesh. The desire to squeeze and hurt was overmastering. So we see there this moment where Ralph is governed by his id, and his desire to inflict pain is all encompassing. So this moment in the previous chapter is definitely foreshadowing this moment here. Golding's pointing out that it's there, kind of almost ready. And this is his ultimate message. Because of his experiences of war, where he didn't believe that there was one good side and one bad side, he looked at war, his own actions as well, and thought, we're all capable of this. There's no right and wrong. In fact, he criticised the British and said that they were smug for having this strict, we're the good guys, we're the ones in the right, and these are the guys that are evil. He knows that he killed civilians, so he knows that he committed atrocity, i.e. he felt that every single person was capable of committing these kind of dark acts. And so Ralph, our protagonist, taking part in killing Simon, echoes this idea. And actually, by the end of the novel, like, the shift in Ralph's character is so extreme. He has gone from leader to victim. And I just thought I would include this. I mean, it's such a brilliant quote, where you get this sort of sense of the threat, you know, how far the savagery has come, where we get the incomprehensible reply when Ralph has said, you know, what are you going to do when you catch me? And we get the incomprehensible reply, Roger sharpened a stick at both ends. So the reason I've included this in presentation of Ralph is Golding does this. He juxtaposes Ralph's strength at the beginning and this kind of idea of him being a natural leader that nobody can really touch, to at the end of the novel, him being a victim of potentially the most savage violence, they want to put his head on a stick, is demonstrating how powerful savage instincts can become when the rules and the order of civilization is taken away. But thankfully, Ralph's head is not put on a stick because they are rescued. There is resolution, but it's somewhat ironic. Obviously, one of Ralph's biggest priorities as leader was keep the fire going, get rescue. By the end of the novel, a fire is lit, but it is one that is meant to end life. So the expectation that Ralph had for fire was life. The expectation that Jack has for fire is death, whether it's in eating, with the pigs, or in this case, with Ralph. But what actually ultimately happens is by destroying the island, because that's what the fire does, it becomes so out of control that it is destroyed, they do inadvertently end up signaling the ship. So as the whole island is shuddering with flame, along comes the officer, and we have this, dreadfully ironic, are you having a war or something? Nobody killed, I hope. Any dead bodies? And Ralph's stark answer, only 2, and they've gone. So bleak. That's it from me on Ralph. I'm sure there's many more things I could have said, but, do feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions about other passages from the novel or any thoughts that you have about Ralph, and I will get back to you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. It helps me massively, but also you'll get notifications of when all the other videos are ready for you. That's it from me. Thank you so much again for sticking with me. Happy revising.